Today, we're going to be talking about shading and core shadow. I know a lot of you are artists, a lot of you maybe know this stuff already, but this is what you all voted for, and I'm happy to oblige. If you guys are artists, I encourage you to pull up some kind of paper or program of your choice and draw along. I'm going to be doing my best to explain what I understand about shading and value, and hopefully being able to help you out in some way. So, shading and core shadow. In order to talk about shading, I think we need to start by asking what shading is. I think that people have perhaps an oversimplified or wrong idea of what shading is. I think people use shading like it's just you add gradients and it makes the picture look better. You know what I mean? And frankly, it's not actually that surprising. I think it's a very reasonable conclusion when you look at how people appreciate shading, like just random people. They're like, oh, the shading's so good. But I think we should be clear. When we talk about shading in art, we're talking about using lighter and darker forms of color to convey the effects of light. It's not to make an image look good. That just tends to happen because people are compelled by the effects of light. Now, this is the important part that if you're an artist and you haven't heard of this before, I encourage you to think about. When I talk about, like, shading, and particularly what I'm going to call the core system of shading, this is what we mean. You have this sphere, and we're probably familiar with this, especially if you've taken art classes, right? You light it, you make one part dark, but I want to ask you all here, where is the darkest part on the sphere, particularly relative to where the light is? Notice how the darkest part is not the part that's farthest away. It's not the bottom left. I mean, you can see that it's casting a shadow, but when we talk about the sphere itself, it is not this part. This right here is what we call the reflected light. And what the reflected light means is that you're going to get this core shadow on any object. You're going to find that the darkest part is not the part farthest away from the light, but the part second to farthest away. We can, in fact, name all of these different shades, and we're going to do that so that it makes it easy. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, representing the different lights and dark tones. Does anyone care to hazard a guess at what the different numbers are called? Keeping in mind that even though this and this are about the same darkness, we're mostly talking about this particular 3. 1 is the highlight, that's correct. 1 is the brightest part and represents where the light is coming from. Now, if you've been paying attention, you should also be able to hazard a guess at what 4 is, and even 3. 4 is the core shadow, that's correct. That's the darkest part on the object, which is not farthest away from the light, but second to farthest. 5 is the bounced or... Oh, 5? Are you sure? This is 3, yes. Good save. Now, you will also see this referred to as the halftone. Magmonique is technically right, but I think it's important to understand it as the reflected light, because that term says more about what is actually happening in the scene. Good, 5 is the cast shadow. Now, Monique is actually very close to knowing what 2 is. I think what would be fair to say is if you called this 3.5, 3.5 would be the halftone. They are the same darkness, but they serve different functions. Does that make sense? 2 is, I think, the hardest in terms of, like, what we call this. So if you guys want to take a guess, 2 is not the reflected light. Remember that the reflected light is 3. 3 is this part on the other side. But what is 2? What is the part between the light part and the core shadow? I think, honestly, main tone is a appropriate term. I've heard it called the local tone. 2 is the closest thing you could understand to the natural color of the object. But let's talk about this a little bit more, because I think that it's worth understanding, like we were alluding to before, why it is that things look this way. But if you're new to shading systems, just drill this part into your head, that the darkest part is not this. It's this. It's this. This is going to serve you very well, I guarantee it. But why is it this way? It's kind of unintuitive, right? If the light is coming from this direction, then you would imagine that the darkest part is here, and the next darkest part is there, and it gets, like, brighter as it goes towards the light, right? Why is this not the case? It's something that I imagine Fabled Wind understands, based on how she characterized what's going on here. Yeah, the darkest part is 4, correct. Of the object, although keep in mind, 5, the cast shadow, is actually darker than 4. We'll get into that presently. But why is it that this part is dark? Is not dark? That this is incorrect? This would be what you'd expect, but it's not what the core system implies. The thing to remember is that objects don't really exist in isolation, right? This object is on top of something, in pretty much every case. And light isn't just going to hit the object, it's going to hit everything else. There you go, Dan. All light is reflection, and the object is affected by the ambient light. But let's break down what that means, right? If everything is being hit by light, then the light that it's hit by is also going to hit everything else. It's going to bounce back up and hit this object again. It's not going to be as bright, but it's going to be a little bit lighter. That's what creates this effect, except in one place. The cast shadow is literally defined as the area where light is blocked, so you will find it's actually going to be even darker than the core shadow. And you're going to get something like this. Now again, if this is new, you may need to hear it a few different times to really understand it. So we'll just briefly summarize again. Everything in an environment reflects light, and therefore, even on what you'd expect to be the darkest side of an object, you'll get a little light that bounces off the other objects in the scene. Does that make sense? Now, when it comes to things like, random sphere in the middle of nowhere, this seems pretty self-evident. But it gets a little bit more difficult when you get to complicated objects, right? Like, let's take Cinder here. This is my co-host, Cinder, the Cyndaquil. But what is Cinder, He's not a sphere. He's got... just his head is this long teardrop shape, right? Cinder, the Cyndaquil. This is a very complicated shape, So what's going on here? Like, how do we even try to do lighting on this, right? What you're going to realize is when we get down to it, you can still identify in any object where you know the volume where those core shadows are going to be. If the light is coming from here, then you'll have a core shadow on this side, and then on this side as well. Maybe a little bit over here. Oh, guess who, everybody? It's our other friend Mifune. Say hi to Mifune when he's been sitting in the laundry basket for the past half hour. He's decided to come out. Mifufu. You woke me up at 6 in the morning today, you little jerk. He's acting all innocent. So, given this setup, we can put what we've learned into action by making the other side of Cinder have a little bit of this reflected light, yes? And see how much depth the object suddenly takes on when we do this, right? Now suddenly you can really feel the roundness, I think. Now, a lot of traditional art classes will spend a lot of time trying to train you how to blend smoothly, and we're not really going to talk about that today. This isn't really a class about technique, it's about theory. But just know that blending these colors smoothly and gradually into each other is very helpful in achieving these effects. Now, we just kind of made that happen without explaining it. So let's dig a little deeper into how to shade any object. Now, what did we say that shading was? We said that shading is using different kinds of colors to convey the effects of light, okay? What does shading show, then? That's a question that I think is interesting. What does shading show? If you correctly convey the effects of light, what are you showing with the shading that you make? Would anyone care to hazard some guesses? Volume. Yes, volume is the correct #1 answer. The most important thing is that shading shows volume. See how when you took at this object, compared to this object, compared to this object, the contour is the same. All that's changing is where the light is, and that shows us what kind of object we're looking at. This might seem obvious, but it's the most important thing, because it implies something else. If you don't know the volume of what you're drawing, then you cannot shade it. Okay? Here's a shape. Tell me, what is this shape? What are we looking at here? What kind of object is this? Do you guys know? It's a trick question. We can't know, and there's multiple correct answers. Say this is the lower arm. Well, now we can kind of shade it in like this. Now we have the impression of an object that's kind of rounded like this, right? But consider, same outline. What if this object was somehow like pyramid-like like so. One side was very dark, the other side extremely bright. And now you have an object that's like this. See how different that is? You might look at these and say, okay, I get it, like, shading changes the shape, but that's not what I'm saying exactly. I'm saying that if you don't know what the shape is, you can't shade it. Here's a more concrete example. Say you're drawing a person. I know most of you are character artists, right? So we have the outline of an arm here, right? Tell me, is this an arm like this, coming in front? Or is it an arm like this, going out to the back? There is no correct answer, but you have to choose one answer. If you don't know, you can't shade the arm. You need to commit to one answer thoroughly, and the dangerous part is that when you just draw, some people will try and just, yeah, you know, it's an arm, somehow, somewhere, and then you'll get in trouble, because you don't know how to shade it. You can't, because you don't know what the volume is. So, what this means is, the first step in shading is know the volume. If the volume is unclear, then you have to interpolate. You can't just see an object that you don't quite understand and try to shade it. For example, like I'm looking at my cat now, right? He's literally right next to me. How do you shade this? Well, the first thing is to note that this kind of resembles a cylinder, right? We understand the cylindrical shape. And the light is probably, you know, if it's coming from that direction, for example, then the core shadow would be here, and the reflected light would be there. The head, it's, it could be thought of like a sphere, right? The ears are interesting. They're kind of like pyramids. Now, you could split the top into its own separate cylinder if you wanted. Whatever makes sense to you. The tail is also interesting, so I'm going to choose to interpret it like it's a long rectangle like this. A prism. Same with the arms. They're little prisms too. They kind of look more like spheres to me again. I know this sounds basic, but an impressive amount of streamers I see in art kind of have ambiguous volumes in the stuff that they draw, I feel. Now, let's continue by asking, what else does shading show? But there's at least 3 other things that I'm looking for. And in case you didn't realize, when I say that shading shows something, it is also implied that you'll need to know this something. Cast shadow for the chin? You mean with the cat? Yeah. If we really wanted to, since these objects overlap, I was going to wait till later for this, but there should be a cast shadow underneath the chin, and also over the arms. Contrast, right. Well, we had that spoiled, but it's true. Shading also shows contrast. This is actually, I think, remarkably undersold as one of the values of shading, but understand that as artists, you direct the eye through contrast. What are people more drawn to in an object, in a picture? Something that's bright or something that's dark? You probably realize this is a trick question, but can you figure out the answer? What are people more drawn to? Something that's different. Pretty much. It's not light. That's definitely not the case, Fable. Badgers is closer. But it's when light or dark contrast. Look at each of these pictures individually, right? Are you drawn to the light, or are you drawn to the dark, or are you drawn to this guy, who is dark on light? What about this guy? Are you drawn to this dark space? Are you drawn to this light space? Or are you drawn to this little white hat over the dark? We're drawn to contrast. By controlling where contrast exists in the picture, you control where people focus. That means that when you draw a picture, you should have an idea in your head of where or what the audience should focus on. Because if you don't know, then you can't control the contrast. This is all new to me. Oh, wonderful. Yes, whenever you look at a full composition, consider the contrast. Let's try and find one example before we move on. Alright, let's try this image. Consider this image from Total War 3 Kingdoms. Now, I am fine with talking about the color, but we're not talking about color today, so let's make this simpler. Where are you focused on here? Where specifically? It's just black and white. There's no color involved. Because I will wager, big face on the left. Right, what part of the face? Right where the hairline is. The hairline? As in this? As in this? The rim light. What I'm trying to get at is what Defiant Badgers has caught on to, which is this. Doesn't this and this draw your eye? Just like this does? Just a little bit like this does? What do all of these things have in common? They are where the brightest part of the face corresponds to the cast shadow. Look at how dark this is, and how light this is, so you focus on this form. How bright the left side of his face versus the dark of the core shadow, so you focus on this. The darkness of Sun Tzu's armor versus the brightness and the fadedness of everything behind him. So we focus on that. Even without these colors, which add even more contrast, by the way. It's the interplay of light and dark that help make our focus. And if we just take it down here, where do you think the artist wanted you to focus? You know? What do you think, if you think of this concept in the abstract, which parts are important? Probably Lu Bu, Cao Cao, Sun Tzu, Diao Chan. And this guy less so, obviously, because he's further back. Guess what? He's further back and less important, so he has less contrast. Is this why people draw grayscale and then do color? I've never understood that. It helps people plan. I honestly have been thinking about doing it more, but what people like about grayscale, in my opinion, is that it helps them group color. It helps them understand beforehand, where do I want my darkest points to be, and where do I want my lightest points to be, rather than just, making it on the fly. Now, I think that there are disadvantages to doing this, because it still gets people to stop thinking in color, but today's lesson is not about color. So we will not go there too much. I think that you're starting to understand why people do those kinds of grayscale exercises, for sure. In the grand scheme of things, I think that you should be thinking about color just as you think about value and shading. But that's a really good point. So, shading shows volume and shading shows contrast. If you want to shade something, you need to know what its volume is, and you need to know where you want people to focus. There's at least one more thing that I really think you guys should be able to guess about what shading shows. So, what is it? Correct. Light direction. You can't shade if you do not know light direction. Now, this is something that I think it's telling that this is one that we didn't see guessed right off the bat. But this is so important. If you don't know where the light is coming from, you can't shade. When you do your shading, maybe you're not thinking about where the light is coming from, but oh my god, you really should be. If you don't think about where the light is coming from, then your shading will be inconsistent, and that doesn't convey the effects of light. There's a wonderful exercise. Guilty of not doing this. Yeah, there's a lot of people. I think that this is, if nothing else, the mistake that people understand most directly. You can sort of cheat around a lot of things, but whenever your light isn't working, it's usually because of this. Especially when you get to multiple objects in the same scene. So it's really simple. Right? Whenever you start a scene, don't think in terms of this part should be bright and this part should be dark. Think in terms of where the light is. You know, we'll plan out everything in the scene. We'll have this, king guy, right? Whatever, he's a king. We won't think too deeply into this. He can be holding this scepter, why not? Take this out. So, let's make a couple different versions, actually. And ask ourselves, where should the light be coming from? Remember that when we talk about where light is coming from, there are two parts to answering this question. Question 1, on the horizontal, where is the light coming from? We can talk about this like it's a clock. 12, 3, 6, 9. Call out a number. Anyone. Between 1 and 12. Okay, I heard 3 first. So 3. From the right side. But there's another part to this question. Do you know what it is? What's the other part to figuring out where the light is coming from? I'm assuming that would be the angle. Good job, Rex. The vertical. How high or how low are we? And welcome to the chat. I forgot if you drew, Rex. Hopefully you do, because you obviously know your stuff. It's not about the time of day, King, because the principal light source isn't always the sun, and you don't always know which direction is north. So it's more important to understand the angle. $12, 3, 6. So, call it another number. Between 12... Well, let's... Alright. Let's have it between 0 and 6, then. for ease of reference. Call it a number between 0 and 6. 5. Interesting, isn't it? 5. So where is our light source then? It's from the right side, but it's also from below. Hmm? This is going to make for some interesting light interplay. The crown will be mostly in shadow, but the underside of the neck will not be. I usually base a makeshift sundial to understand the intensity and the placement. I mean, in essence, that's what we've done, you know? This is a kind of sundial. Whatever works for you, just be sure you understand the direction. Because the light is coming from below, these top parts will actually be in shadow. He still casts a cast shadow, so we wouldn't see very much up there. I'm going to assert that there's some kind of, you know, side here. You wouldn't see the top of the hand, but you might see the bottom of the scythe. You'll notice that for studies like this, I'm really only using 2 shades, but what I'm effectively doing is dividing the frame into what's shaded and what's not, and I can easily go from here to say, okay, here is the cast shadow, right? Here's the core shadow. And look how, like, effective that becomes. The point is that you can, you know, once you have the principles down, you should be able to move from a couple shades to more than a couple shades relatively easily. Gotta make it harder for you? It's fine. I think it illustrates the principles very well, and that's the important part, not making it hard or whatever like that. Making it harder for you guys. Hopefully I'm not making it harder for you guys, but I hope you guys understand, right? So in the interest of the exercise, let's do it again. Someone different. Number 1 to 12. So eerie. That's what happens when you get light from the bottom. 8. Okay. So she wants 8. 8 is here. So now we're talking about a little from the front, but from the other side. Okay, someone pick another number. Again, from 0 to 6. 2. Okay, so a little bit above. This is interesting because you're going to get a lighting that's kind of flat here with regards to a lot of the character, but we'll give it a shot. One thing that doesn't necessarily follow, obviously, is that light which is more extreme is going to be easier for you to draw. I'll repeat that again. Light that's more extreme, easier to draw. If you have light that's very front on, say at 6 and 3, just literally straight at the guy, this is going to be hard to depict. And it's moreover, it's not going to look that interesting. So I would encourage you to try purposefully to put yourselves in situations where you're going to get a more extreme lighting. It's slightly above, so we'll see the depressions of the eyes. Furthermore, we see a little bit below the arm. Cast shadow from the hand. But because it's mostly from the front, you're not going to see that much shading on the fingers. There's a cast shadow from the arm itself. Now, you may notice that I'm having a bit of, I guess I would call it trouble. Why is that? Because I don't know the volume very well. I just made this up on the spot for you guys. So I'm having to make assumptions. Now the important thing is that I am making assumptions. I'm not just taking for granted that, oh, I don't know, I'll just make this part dark, you know? When you don't know, figure it out. See, even here, I'm probably shading a little too much on the right side, but it gives good directionality. So it helps. We'll assume that there's an arm back here. Maybe there's fingers here. That would cast a shadow. If you just had the gray, then yes, you could interpret the arm as being on the other side. But I'm committing to having it be on the side that's closer to us. In fact, one thing I'm going to do is actually erase some of this. Cast shadow should principally be back here. The silhouette from before could make it seem like, yes, that's correct. But given this lighting, I've already assumed that the arm is actually on the front. So I'm going to try and be consistent in that regard. Okay, so it follows then that in order to light your scene, we now have two things that you have to know. The direction and the volume, and ideally, the focus. Now, if you had to prioritize these, I would still say volume is most important, light direction is second most important, and focus is third most important. But you really should have all of them. Yes, and you are correct, Monique. Like we were saying before, it would be perfectly valid to understand this as having the arm behind when you take these shadows out. And that is why you have to understand the volume before you do the shading. Now, there's one more thing that it's helpful to know when you do shading. I'm not sure if anyone's going to guess it. Shading shows material. The quality of an object, the texture of that object, can be shown through how you shade it. It's important to remember that this is a thing. In order to shade, we need to know volume, direction, focus, and material. You need to know what your drawing is made of. Okay? Like light scattering and stuff. Yes, I think it's definitely the least important aspect, but sometimes it helps you to understand why certain things are bright or dark. The most important aspect of this is the idea of the specular highlight, which is the really bright but tiny bit of light. So, in order to demonstrate this, I want to try and go through composition sort of from scratch here. But let's go one more time through the things that we're going to do to make this happen, okay? The first thing we're going to do is make our volume. We're going to avoid situations where we only have a flat object. We want to be very clear beforehand on what those things are. If an object is complicated, you want to break it down. You want to eliminate ambiguity. I don't know if this picture makes sense to you guys yet, so let me try and emphasize here. At its simplest form, if you have this shape, it's a cylinder of some kind, right? We're just going to assume this is a cylinder of some kind. But tell me, are we looking up at it, or are we looking down on it? A harder highlight is shinier, while a softer highlight is more matte. That's correct. That's why it's like it's a part of shading, but it's not the most important part. It really comes down to, when you see these two lines here, which one is hidden. If we're seeing this, then we're looking up on it. If we're seeing this, then we're looking down on it. For everything in your scene, you want to be able to answer that question. Even for complicated things like this, you'll still find instances where, for example, this curve of the neck, we're clearly looking down. This jawline, we're clearly looking up. But of course, most of you don't really have much interest in drawing, spheres all day. Nonetheless, you're going to want to break down complicated objects into simpler ones. You've probably seen this done in studies, but how much have you done it yourself, especially when you're just drawing casually? Do you think you could break down a human into just these objects? At first you might say not really. Like, you can't make a person out of cubes. Well, you sort of can. If you allow for these objects to change in length, but still have these fundamental qualities, you'll start to realize that you can break everything down this way. And by doing that, you can understand where the light and dark should hit. So the number one thing that you want to be able to do whenever you're going to shade something is to break it down into shapes like this. Now, obviously I'm using characters, but you should remember that this applies to backgrounds and props as well. Anything is a combination of these three objects in some shape or form. That's a good basic way to think about it. Now, once you understand the volumes, you need to understand the light direction. And as we said, the important thing about light direction is to decide on both the horizontal and vertical plane where it is. We only glossed over this, but when light is coming, from here, from directly in front, it's flat in the sense that it doesn't show the entirety of the object. You'll notice another thing too. What's missing from this object? This is a question for you. You remember our 5 lighting types? What's not here? There is no cast shadow, it's true, but for now we'll ignore that just because there's nothing else in the scene. We can assert that it's probably casting a shadow here, but it's mostly obscured, which is a clue to what's actually missing. Well, technically the highlight is missing, that's true, but we can just assert that this is a matte object, although it is worth saying that if we were to put the highlight in, it would it wouldn't really tell us much about the light direction. At least it probably wouldn't, because it's just here in the center. The answer I'm looking for is that there's no reflected light. Why is there no reflected light? Because you wouldn't see any. Because you're only seeing the light. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that that's not very interesting. We don't get to show the full effects of light, which is the whole point of shading, as we discussed earlier, if you can't see where the reflected light is. So, light from this direction is boring. Boring. Flat. Don't use it. And you might think that this is obvious, but so many people will just, they'll draw their characters, and by and large, they haven't really thought about it. So, on a good day, you'll put shadows underneath your character. But sometimes, you'll just assert that, I don't know, it's bright. Lights from the front. It's a bad idea, don't do it. You want to know the focus. And this is kind of a composition thing, right? What is the point of your drawing? And where do you want people to look? Well, you start with your rule of thirds, right? You all know the rule of thirds. The most interesting parts of a picture are not the center, it's the intersection of thirds. Anything at these 4 points is going to draw our attention. So logically, that's where we want our contrasts to be. And finally, you just want to know what the materials are. As was alluded to earlier, we're mostly talking about something matte or something specular. And what this is mostly going to affect is that highlight we were talking about earlier. If you haven't heard these terms before, you've probably seen or thought about them. A matte object, like say, a unpolished table, doesn't really reflect anything. That's it. We can give it a teensy bit of reflected light, maybe, but it's going to be incredibly subtle. Compare that to a specular or reflective object. This object is going to have some kind of a bright highlight whenever it's hit by light directly. This object may start looking the same at first, until, bam! See how much of a difference that makes? It's not that the highlight is very widespread, it's still localized to certain places, but the fact that it's there gives this object some kind of a personality. Not every object is going to have a very pronounced highlight like this, but objects that are metallic, objects that are wet, we'll see this. This is why you often see, I'm trying to find a polite way to put this. I know that you're all about them cute anime girls, right? Well, the skin, look at your hand. Tell me, is this a matte or a specular object? Sure, you can see highlights, but those highlights are diffuse. So another thing to think about is if we're going to highlight this matte object, it's going to look more, it's going to look like this, right? It's diffuse. It's very smooth. See how sharp it is here? Not just how bright, but how contrasting. It comes back to contrast. You guys remember contrast. So if the skin is usually a matte object, why would you put on a specular highlight? Because it makes the skin look wet, and that's hot. You can reflect on that for a while. Yes! Yes! Yeah! Sorry. I didn't plan that, but it had to be said. Reflect on it. So all of you artists, I'd like you to take up some kind of take up your favorite drawing tools and let's draw something together, shall we? We're gonna try and put everything that we've talked about to use, and together, let's think of something to draw. Okay? Let's see. What should we be drawing? Let's try and keep it relatively simple. Do you guys think that you can draw Pancake, maybe? Pancake. He's here, okay? Here's your reference. This is Pancake. Draw a wet pancake, okay? So we're gonna do this again, right? We're going to draw. Let's go through this, right? Well, you can't draw something without knowing what it is. So we're gonna draw Pancake. Dan wants me to draw Pancake wet, but he's obviously not gonna stick around to do it. So I'm not sure if I want to. What do you guys want? I assumed you meant an actual pancake. No, I like that too. Okay, pancake on a pancake. That's definitely what we're doing. Pancake on a pancake. We know that we're drawing pancake on a pancake, or pancake on pancakes. That's even better, for a variety of reasons. I'll explain. What do we still need to know? Effectively, this answers the question of what are the volumes here. We have Pancake. He's a very simple shape. He's kind of an elongated, flattened sphere, like this. You understand that, right? He has little ridges. The ridges are slightly thick, but only a little bit. But why do I like Pancakes? Well, because, you know, Goro Akechi fan for all of your Persona people. But also, because a stack of pancakes looks remarkably similar to what? What does this remind you of, everyone? All I meant was that it was a cylinder. The point being that now we know what these volumes are, okay? So we have the volumes. What do we get next? What do we still need to know? Anybody? Anybody at all? This also technically tells us our materials. For example, if there's syrup here, that's going to be specular, because it's a liquid. And the pancakes and Pancake himself are both going to be matte. Well, yeah, so we know the textures now. But there's two things that we still need to figure out, don't we? Light direction. There you go. We need the light direction. You guys all say that you know to do it, but you don't do it. So you have to know to do it. So, here we go. Where is the light coming from, horizontal? Cast your votes. Ooh, 2 and 11. Now remember, why is 6 and 12 not on this list? Because, at least for now, we're basically just going to say they are boring. There's actually a quick digression to be had here, which is we've talked about why 6 is boring. We've talked about why light from the front is not very interesting, right? But we never talked about why light from the back may not be ideal either. Light from the back is definitely better than light from the front. Light from the front, what's that going to look like? Well, it's going to look like this, sort of. It's going to look like this, but it's going to have a little bit of light around here. Basically, you're going to get a silhouette. Sometimes this is good. Sometimes you want a dramatic look like this. But it's still not going to show most of the things, right? Like now we have no highlight. We barely have any reflected light. So light from the back can be useful, but it's not going to illustrate the points of our lesson today. Does that make sense? Okay. So they want it from below. Now, I really do encourage any of you who want to quote-unquote learn from the class to try this out yourselves. I think you'll find it an educational piece. Now, technically, we want to know about our focus. I'm just going to take the liberty of laying that out for all of us. So, if we start laying out the piece, right? This isn't really a composition class, so so I want the focus to be like over here. I'm just saying that arbitrarily, again. Okay, here's what we'll do. We'll pose him. We'll pose him to model for us. Okay? He's modeling for you. So make sure that you consider how to do this. But the lighting is wrong, you say. Nick, the lighting isn't coming from the correct spot. Well, that's why we're going to make the lighting ourselves. That's what the class is all about. Okay? So we've got ourselves here. Our lighting is coming from basically down here. Something like this is our composition. Now, just for the sake of being very complete, and because this is basically a class, right? Let's do the sphere. Let's figure out from the sphere what it should look like, okay? Why is it coming from below? I'm imagining like a superhero on top of a tall tower of pancakes. I like it. All right, new plan. We're following Fable's logic here. He's actually on top of like an unending tower of pancakes, like in the sky, and it's like a spotlight. Okay, that's the new logic, and I love it. I love especially how Fable is making a story justification for the light idea, which is exactly what you should be doing. He's now on top of an endless tower of pancakes. He's found like a restaurant that will give him endless pancakes, and he like has a snicker, and he's like, they have no idea, you know? The highlight is down here. I encourage you all not to look at the screen and try and figure this out for yourselves. Like, fill out the sphere. Try and figure out where the lighting should be coming from. What it should look like. Where's the core shadow? You won't see a cast shadow because there's no object. It's just for our reference. The sphere is not casting light onto a floor, therefore there's no cast shadow. IHOP all-you-can-eat buffet gone wrong. Correct. Okay, is everybody ready? We're going to draw it all together now. And for the sake of the class, let's try and keep it in black and white. And at the end, we'll all share each other's results. I'm just continuing to sketch Pancake. Plump ol' Pancake. I don't have a sketch done yet. Gotcha. How's everyone else doing? Look, I'm not going back to this sketch because I don't want you to copy it. So it does, like, I want you to just remember what we've planned out. Like, that's it. Ton of pancakes. They have the form of a cylinder, generally. This is Pancake. He looks like that. The lighting is going to be from below and to the left. That's all you should need to know. So, make a layer here. Endless pancakes is what we'll call this. Now, this isn't the end of the class after we finish this. After this, I want to go through, first, some complexities. Some things that maybe even some of the more experienced among you may not know yet. Or may not have been taught about previously. And then some examples. From you, hopefully, and also from other artists, classic artists. That should help us. Okay? Alright. I'm going to move Pancake up a little bit more. I want his Pancake smile to be the focus, right? He's got his little pancake arms. Little pancake legs. Trying to keep it pretty flat here. I'm mostly drawing these to help understand the form, right? Right now, I'm mostly just here to understand the volumes of the objects. Remember what we said before, right? You can start with just 2. It's not hard to go from here onwards. You don't have to do this all in one layer. I'm going to, like, really lean into Fable's idea of endless pancakes. I'm gonna put, like, a spotlight down here. This is what we call justifying lighting. That is, giving a reason in the picture why the light is coming from the direction it's coming from. From the creators of Godzilla vs. King Kong. Pancake. He'll eat anything as long as it's pancakes. Oh, we're so alike, you and I also like how it fits in with the black and white theme, you know? Like it's the 1930s. Someone save him! Save who? The pancakes! Think of the pancakes! Okay. So I'm going to start here with the top of Pancake. Technically, everything on this side is reflected light. Here as well. Whoops. Now the highlight is especially bright down here. Pancake is, again, a pretty matte character, so we're going to spread the highlight out. But remember what we said about focus, too. We also want to make sure that the most contrasting part of Pancake, and Pancake in general, remains the focus. So we're going to give a little bit of light right to the back here, so you still remember that Pancake is the most important thing. His eyes will help with this a lot. Look how that immediately brings our attention here, right? The mark on his face doesn't look like there's anything to it, but it's really, you know, it's a mouth. I understand that form. You understand it to some degree. We can use shading to help express it. Realistically, I would probably recommend doing these last because, you know, or on a separate layer. Either really works. I'm not really happy with how this isn't contrasting enough, so I'm gonna make the core shadow darker. Like, follow my logic here, right? There's not enough contrast, so I'm not getting enough focus. So I'm going to that's what informs my decision to change the values here. And yes, you have it precisely, Fable. Because we want him to be the focus, we're going to create the most contrast on Pancake himself. Make sense? Additionally, who can figure out where the cast shadows should be here? Like we said before, whenever there's multiple objects and one casts a shadow over the other, there should be a cast shadow. There's no need to be this quick. Cast shadow should be down here on the pancakes. Again, if you're doing this exercise, there's no need to watch me. The VOD will be here for you. It's not like my answer is the one correct answer either. What else is on pancakes? That's right, butter. Butter is literally an oil, so it's going to be very specular. Furthermore, by adding the butter, I'm creating more contrast next to our main boy. Bringing our eyes back to him. In some ways, I actually feel like the butter creates too much contrast. See how your eyes now gravitate towards the butter instead of to pancake? So now that I see this, I actually want to take the butter out because I don't like where the focus is. You see where this is going? I don't have all the right answers, at least not immediately. And usually, not even eventually, but I'm going to get there by working through these problems. I'm actually going to put the butter on a separate layer. Wouldn't that draw attention to the butter and not pancakes? Yes, exactly. And so that's why I'm going to move it over to here. Now the butter is part of this grouping here with Pancake and his pancakes. So I think it works. But as Bob Ross would say, you don't need to put butter into your picture. You can put it as much or as little butter as you want. It can be your own little world. Oh no. Incoming what V. This is what Fabled Wind did. See how she's made it so that the light is catching on this left side of all the pancakes, and that they also cast shadows? It's very nice. The one thing that I will say is remember what we were talking about with the core shadows. This will look better if you try to keep in mind the idea that the darkest part is not going to be at this far end, right? Try and go out of your way to make sure that the dark part is somewhere kind of not necessarily at the middle, but not at the end either. And things will look better this way. You see what I'm getting at here? Really great work for such a short time. I know that everyone says they know what it is, and like, I get it. It feels simple in principle, but putting it to use is difficult. So make sure that the farthest side away from the light is not the darkest part, and your work is going to look like really slick. I'm going to try and do a little bit more on mine, and then we're going to go to our more advanced principles, okay? And let the syrup flow. You can perhaps see. Even for this syrup, I'm going to try and put in a little bit of reflected light. But you'll notice something is, now I'm starting to lose the volumes here. I want to always be sure to keep the volumes in mind. Remember that since the light is from the bottom, the tops are going to be dark. That feels better. To me, this syrup has more of the, what's the word I'm looking for? More of the volume. This syrup better reflects the volume that I want out of these pancakes. Remember the core shadow. A little bit of specular light. If I want to do this better, I would look at actual syrup, try and figure out what it looks like in situations like this, but we're just sort of throwing this together. So this is what we get. Pancake, king of the co-hosts. Look at that face. He's all smiles until someone gets between him and his pancakes. Make him hold a knife. Of course, you know, to eat the pancakes. I will actually do that because it's a great opportunity to introduce another specular object. Oh, it's a butter knife, of course. Where is the lighting going to be on this thing? It's going to be on the bottom, of course. The knife is a very different material from the rest of everything, so it's going to be very metallic, very dark very dark core shadow. Very bright specular highlight. There you go. And just for fun, I'm going to put in a few like buildings here in the back. Buildings. Light is also going to follow the same way from the bottom up. But in a preview of things we're going to discuss shortly, we're going to have the buildings cast a little bit of their own light because they have windows. Pancake. The thrilling event only in theaters. Summer 2025. Summer 1925. But yeah, see how all the buildings still follow the lighting rules that we set up? It's important. Note also how even though I'm using really bright lights down there, they don't attract you from Pancake very much because there's not much contrast. Now this stuff up here does attract a little bit, so I'm actually going to fade it out just a tad. And there we have Pancake, King of the Monsters. Excellent. Great. I wasn't expecting that I would be drawing this today. and I'm enjoying it, so let's make this a little bit darker. This again helps illustrate that the light is from this side by making this side darker, make clear. The syrup is still a little dissatisfactory, but I think that's mostly because it's so straight down. I can also imagine that making it a little darker might help. Ooh, look at this mysterious, delicious pancake. Alright, won't do that again. Ooh, nice. Not satisfied with the syrup. Yes. It's better though. Especially on Pancake himself. I think that this is improved. I like your knife is... I like how putting it under here makes it look like Pancake has like the knife in his nose. Anyways, so this is Fable's second draft. And you can see how by moving the core shadow further up, she's successfully helped the depth of Pancake here, especially with the legs. Same with the Pancake stack as a whole. I think that works well. Thank you so much. So that's like our exercise. You can continue drawing it, and if you really want to do this and understand it, you should try it again. Same composition, just with light coming from a different direction. You might be blown away by what you figure out there. Now, there are certain complexities for every one of these situations, and I think that it's worth going into them. I expect that this stuff may be a little more interesting to the artists in the audience, and perhaps a little more difficult to follow for the people who are newer. But no overview of shading techniques would be complete without a bit of this discussion. First, let's talk about that whole breakdown thing. You may remember I was telling you earlier to try and break everything down into cubes or spheres or cylinders, right? And you might say, right, I know, but some objects are just not like that. And I'd recommend you again, look at Mifune's cat tree. What is this? What do you think this resembles? Look at this thing. What is it, basically? You can break down a lot more objects into these than you might think. However, it is possible, and a lot of people do, break them into slightly more complicated shapes. You can obviously break down objects in a more complex fashion. The problem is that if you don't understand these objects, then you're back to that first problem of not knowing your volumes, and you can't do shading if you don't know your volumes. So if you're going to make a non-standard primitive, or let's say a non-standard volume, then you need to know a few things. You need to know the cross sections. What do I mean by cross sections? Well, if I draw the lower arm here, you can see it right there. I guess let's see. We should go back. You should need to know the perspective. We've talked about this. Are we looking up at this arm? Yes, we know because we can't see this part, but we can see this part. So we're looking up. We have the perspective. You need to know the cross sections. That means that if I follow the surroundings of the arm, can you do this, what I just did? Can you do this for every part if you needed to? If you can't technically do this, and I'm not saying to do this for everything, but if you're having trouble figuring out the figure, then it sometimes helps to go back and, you know, can you do the cross sections? But one thing that's very important, especially in human drawing, is the front face. I know a lot of you are character people, so I think you'll find this helpful. Let's draw, you know, a face. Let's simplify it to being like this front, this side, and then let's draw like a chest, okay? We're not using just squares anymore. We're kind of altering it to better reflect the shape of the human body, okay? But we're still using volumes. Which way is the head pointed? Where is it looking? What's it looking at? Is it looking straight to the side? Is it looking a little bit over here? It's a little bit unclear. You have to draw the front face. How about an arm? Where does the side of the arm end? Front face. Now you might look at your arm and say, but then my arm doesn't have corners. I get it. But you need to be able to like simplify in order to do the shading effectively. If you don't, you're just going to get mush and you're not going to know what to do about it. Now eventually, you don't need to simplify, but that's at a point where you've so well understood the things that are here that you don't need to think about it so much. Even the neck, right? Make sure you know where these objects are pointing. Does that make sense? Now there's another thing that's more subtle about shading and volume. When do you see a hard versus a soft shadow? Have you ever thought about it? Let's say that I have my hand, right? I place my hand down here. Now the light is coming from what direction? From this, can you guys figure out what direction the light is coming from? This isn't a trick question. Right, that's correct. The light is coming from this direction. And if we assume that this hand is touching a table, it's going to have a cast shadow, right? Now, Is this shadow going to be sharp? Is it going to be soft? See what I'm getting at? This is a very subtle point. Erase this part here. Soft shadow when the shadow is further away. Good. Do you see? You learned this yesterday. Oh, what am I doing here? As the shadow gets further away, not only does it get lighter, it also gets softer. But there's another dimension to this as well. I'm going to draw an abstract shape. But you can think of this to be like, say, a cloth. Around here, the shape is somewhat soft. Here, the shape is very hard. What do we learn about the volume from this illustration? It's kind of a weird question to answer, I realize. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that soft and hard shading help show curvature of a volume. A harder curve is going to have a harder shadow. Does this make sense? Now, this property is very important, and even to the point where I feel like you might not understand how important it is just now. But let me just illustrate one fascinating thing. All throughout quote-unquote class, we've never talked about lines, right? You probably understand lines to be some kind of a workaround that doesn't really, you know, it's just a way to contain forms, right? It's just a thing you do because you have to find some way to draw things and, like, this is an easy way. Eventually you want to have no lines or something like that. I want you to think of lines differently, as the farthest curve is a line. Let me explain. Consider this, consider a hand, right? Consider a single finger, in fact. We'll assume that the light is coming from this side. And so near to the light, things are kind of bright. As they get farther from the light, they kind of turn away, right? They turn away from us. The surface turns away from us. It gets, we can represent that by making it look darker and darker, until eventually it turns so far that we can't see it anymore. That's a line. Lines represent the curvature of surfaces. Just something to think about. Of course, in real life we don't see lines, but it doesn't mean that you can't incorporate them into what you do and understand them in a volumetric context. Okay? Now, here's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that I think that you guys might very much benefit from, because a lot of artists I know just don't learn this. What happens if we have more than one light source? We've been talking this whole time as if there's only one light direction. There's only one light. Look outside, ladies and gentlemen. I bet you can find two lights shining on you right now. Even if it's light, if it's dark, doesn't matter. There's at least two lights in your room right now. So what do we do? You know? God, what do we do? We've got too many lights. I can see 3. Not including my screen. Your window, your ceiling fan. Your TV, your fan, your iPad, and your phone. These are all light sources. Good. What do we do? What do we do when we have multiple light sources? Well, here's what we do. In film, when you're lighting a scene, that is to say, purposefully creating light in a set, you use what we call the key lighting system. You're catching on, Fable. Technically the phone computer screen, but those would be subtle with how much other brighter lights are here. So you're getting at the point. What is the strongest light that's shining on you right now, everybody? For me, it is definitely the sun outside my window. You can see it here in the camera. Strongest is your window because the room light sucks. It's also the strongest because the light of the sun is like rocking. Now find only one strongest light if you can. Which do you think is stronger, your window or your lamp? Window, for sure. The strongest light is called the key. Key is the number 1 strongest light. It is often the sun, if there is sun, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any very bright light. And I want to emphasize something I haven't so far. If you look in life, sometimes light direction isn't clear. Maybe you're in a dark alleyway and you're just not very well lit. It's not very dynamic. When you're drawing, it doesn't matter. Make it dynamic. Our purpose here is to create images which are compelling, even more so than real life. So if you don't see a light source or it's not obvious, you make one. Now, there are two other important elements in the key lighting system. Does anyone have any idea what they might be? That's right. It's the fill. You can think of the fill as being the opposite to the key, or the number 2. This, for example, could be that lamp. It could even just be reflected light from your wall. This is, in essence, similar to the reflected light that we saw before when we were talking about core shadow, except that it can have a presence in the room. When a character is carrying a light or a candle, if it's really dark, that might be the key light. But if there are candles in the room around them, they might be the fill. Do you understand? The last kind of light is probably the least important, and you will not find it everywhere, but it's important to understand the rim or kick. This is the one that comes from behind the object. So if you haven't caught on, in any scene, if you have multiple light sources, you want to categorize them. Which light is your key? Which lights are fill? And which lights are rim, kick, or incidental that don't cast very much light? One important thing to realize is that the key and the fill, especially when we're going to leave the realm of white and black, can be different colors, okay? If I'm gonna draw, if I'm gonna draw Dear Pancake, my dear Pancake, and it's gonna be a deep dark night, right? Pancake is looking up at the moon, right? The moon. And sitting next to him is going to be a little candle. We'll put it over here. Okay? So here's a scene that has a couple different light sources. Which one is the key and which one is the fill? Sure, let's have the moon be the key. You may realize from my answer that you don't necessarily have one right answer at all times. But for now, I think the moon is actually quite a good answer. So since the moon is the key, that means that that's where the light we treat it as if the light direction is from there, right? Here's our core shadow, here's our reflected light, all of that. The moon with its blue hue on poor blue Pancake. Ooh, Pancake's not poor. He's just a little lonely. A little bit of a cast shadow behind him. We've talked about this. All of this shouldn't be surprising, right? But now, we ask ourselves, remember that reflected light we were talking about? Where's that coming from? Oh, it's coming from our fill. So instead of having that light be blue, we're going to have it be a little bit orange. And it's going to come from just this side. It's going to be very tiny. In comparison to the moon, it's going to be tiny. But look what that does to the feeling. Isn't that kind of lovely? Put a little bit here too. Look at that. You like that? I like that. And I mean, we made this in like 5 minutes, you know? Using fill light as well as key light is probably the #1 trick in the book for people trying to create scenes that feel really dynamic and real. Not really? Okay, let's go back here. So, key and fill. It's basically the idea that there are different lights in a scene. There's going to be one light that's stronger, but the two don't have to be the same color or quality. Let's make a simpler example, right? We will simply return to our friend Cube. Cube. Okay, we have a cube. Just a nice simple cube. Living a simple cube life. And this cube is looking at this I don't know, it's a crystal. It's a Final Fantasy crystal. Okay? It's this Final Fantasy crystal, and it's going to cast, like, blue light, probably. So that means that if the crystal is the key, then the light is coming from this direction, it's going to be bright blue. Right? Now what if he's in, like, a cave, okay? He's in this magical Final Fantasy cave. And at the entrance to the cave, it's sunset, okay? It's sunset outside the cave. But because it's so far from where we are right now, we're not going to consider this the key light. It's not the biggest light. It's not the biggest, most important light in the scene. Okay? But it's still there. It's still a light. So what we do is we say, well, this is a tinier light. This is a fill light. Where we would have thought of there being reflected light, now we think of it as being the light from this fill. So the left side of the cube can be a little bit not as bright and be orange, and the right side can be much brighter and be blue. But now it feels like the entire scene has a bunch of different light sources interacting with it. We can continue doing this for, say, rocks or whatever else is hanging around. And we can light up other things in this environment too, with the key light. Okay? Is that more helpful? Basically, it's like if you have more than one light in the scene, pick one to be the main light and one to be the fill. Okay? Even if they look about even in real life, just make one bigger. Like, think about it like that. And your picture will look better. Okay? Does that help more? Is blowing your mind when? Good. Now, as we were saying before, we talked a lot about contrast and how the point of greatest contrast is usually the point that you're going to look at, and therefore contrast directs interest, and you can use value to convey contrast. You can use value to direct the eye, right? I'm going to duplicate this a few times. Here's a question for you. Oops. More pancakes. If we have several objects, and some of them are closer to us than others, are they all going to have the same amount of contrast? If you have 3 layers of mountain, which is going to be the darkest? The closest one or the farthest one? The closest, yes, you are correct, but that's only part of the answer. Let me give you another thing to consider. Let's imagine that this scene takes place at night. Now, which one is going to be darkest and which is going to be lightest? No. In this case, it's going to be the one that's closest to us. Let me show you why. Look at this. Doesn't it look like it fades into the background when we do that? Now you all got the answer correct on this first one, where of course we want the most distant to look the brightest. But what's missing from this picture is that we're not actually making it brighter. Is this thing that makes the mountains look blue? Partially. Basically, yes, atmospheric perspective. But what I'm trying to say is it's not that they get brighter. It's that they contrast less. We're making this mountain brighter because the sky is white. The less that this mountain contrasts with the sky, the more distant it looks. But what if it's nighttime? We do the opposite. Now, the darker the mountain is, the farther away it looks. When objects grow more distant, they contrast less. You can use shading to convey this. There's only one last thing which makes shading complicated, and you've probably heard of it. You ever wondered how to shade a water droplet or a glass of wine? You've probably noticed that it seems very different from the core shading system that we've talked about up till now. Or what about a pan or something like that? It's very metallic. You know that these objects aren't the same as the ones we've been studying. So what do? What's going on? These are instances of refracted light, that is, light which is bent. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than this, but here is my takeaway. Basically, think of it like if the light is coming from this direction, right? it's going to pool in the opposite area. It might even have a little bit of a highlight, but it's also going to have a highlight right where it came in. In short, it's kind of like a reversed core shadow. It's going to be, you remember our system, right? We have the highlight, the local tone, the core shadow, and the reflected light and the core shadow, in that order, right? So this time, the highlight is in the same place. But now, that core shadow, it's going to be right next to the highlight. The reflected light is going to be further in because this light is reflecting from other objects. And then the local tone is actually going to be very localized. It's going to be kind of the area where we see the highlight pool. You'll notice that these objects also tend to have cast shadows, but those shadows themselves are going to be more... they're definitely not the darkest part. All of them are going to have a little bit of light piercing through. It's very important to show that these objects are translucent. So you have this new system. We can use this for our wine. Note that the surface of the wine is just going to be very bright, but it's this lower part where things get interesting. We of course have the highlight on that surface. Pooled light on the other side. Pooled highlight over here. And that's pretty much it. Now when it comes to the glasses, these things might get a little bit strange looking. And the best way, of course, is to look at actual glasses and do studies. But it's not that unfamiliar, right? We can see on this other side that we've still got our highlight. We can see there's a kind of shadow here in the center, and then we can see that the light pools on the other side in its way. Now sometimes you will see weird things in these, and that's because you're seeing the reflection of other objects in the vicinity of these glasses. And I would encourage you to keep that in mind, but if you're just drawing in the abstract, this is going to be pretty helpful. Now with pots or any metallic object, the important thing is the horizon. Metallic objects tend to reflect almost exactly what comes into them. What this means is that you're usually going to have a section in the middle or so that represents a horizon. And you're going to have a section at the bottom which represents the ground. And the lightest part is going to be right in the middle. So to use our system again, the highlight is here in the middle. The cast shadow is a little bit further down. Oops, I should put this over a separate layer. The reflected light will be the lowest part. and the local tone will be the highest. Does this make sense? I went through that a little bit quickly, but the TLDR is look for that horizon line when you're doing a metallic object, okay? Refraction is interesting, but it's not as different as you would think, and people get very impressed when you do. With that, we have at least touched upon, I think, all of the complexities of using shading. Let's look at a few examples. Classic examples from classical artists. I know you're all big character people. So here's a classic. Classic, right? Okay, class. What's the light direction? Up. That's correct. You can see from the shadows that are cast on Miku's legs in particular, a little bit under her chest, and especially under her dress, that the light is actually downwards. Now, is it coming from the front? I think that it's arguable, but if it is from the front, it's still pretty high up. We discussed this earlier, Jill, but basically, if light is coming from directly in the front, it's usually a very boring, flat lighting setup. And I think that we can understand this to be, at best, very high up, like this, because you're still seeing shading on just underneath the pants, the navel here especially. You wouldn't see this if the light was shining directly at her. The neck also. Even the glasses, which is kind of the refractive stuff we were talking about. I mean, it should really be her cocktail here, but, you know. So, get in the habit. Number 1, where is the light coming from? You all did very good. From above. Number 2, volumes. This is a little bit, it's just as essential, but can you guys do the volumetrics on her? Can you do the cross cuts? I'm going to see here. Let's try and reduce Miku down to basic shapes, okay? Her hair is a little bit exaggerated. Yeah. I think this is definitely circles. These are definitely circles. See how the belt actually does a great job of following these lines? You can also see how the bra follows these lines too. Knowing these lines is just generally very good. You can see how, remember what we were talking about before? You can see this side of the arm, but you can't see this side. So we know that this arm is coming forward. Ah, here's a question. What about this part of the arm? This is kind of difficult, but I'm pretty sure that this arm is in front of the other. So that must mean that we're seeing it coming forward there. Like, it's not going back because we can see this arm in front. You get my logic? And I can keep doing these crosses at any point to help me understand. And don't forget, we want to see where is the front. Where's the front face? How about the leg? Can we do the leg? This was facing down. This is also facing down. Ah, but are these facing down? That's interesting. If you look carefully, you can actually see a subtle bit of anatomy here. There's the large muscle kind of here in the middle. We can just barely see. Now somewhere here, it turns to be facing down. Now by the time we get down here, we're definitely looking down. I really encourage you to do this for any drawings you find interesting, right? Follow these contours. Be able to do these cross sections. The foot even, right? Where's the side? Where's the top? Now here's something that you all struggle with, the hand. Let's divide it into a prism here. And of course there's the thumb, which comes off, all of the fingers too. It's getting to the point where it's so small that they look like flat objects, but each of these should also be dividable into rectangles. You feel me? Now, here's a challenge that I again encourage you all to do. Do this for the hair. The hair is also a form, especially if you want to light it. We have these braids here, it looks like. This shape follows the curve of the head, and this, you can see that this part is darker. It's kind of like a long ribbon. This part is darker. It's not a bunch of threads. It has a thickness. It might look thin, but you don't have to think of it that way. And it wraps around like this. Mostly happens when you have an assignment due in 3 minutes. Okay. You can see how this is turning. Ah, and this is a little interesting here. What's going on here? I don't know exactly. So I'm going to interpret. I'm going to assert that this is flipping around again, because that makes sense to me. That's my situation with two-tone hair. Thank you again for helping. Yeah, well, this is literally explicitly for you, in that sense. If you can't do this for the hair, then you can't shade the hair. Okay? Let's find another very classy example. You know, another classic artist, shall we? Oh yeah, I like this one. Very important. Okay, everyone, where's the light direction coming from this time? The key light, it's from the right. But is it from above or below? The upper right. Good. You can see from well, the thing about the background is that it's kind of I'm not sure that these two characters are meant to be put in the same place background wise, but that's also a lesson in its own, right? Technically, the background and the character have different light sources. This makes it so that the character doesn't quite feel like it belongs in some ways. It's not well integrated. And that's because the character is just taken from another source and put there. It's not terrible, but it's something to be mindful of. As we were saying, though, we can see mostly from the shadows under her cheek and under her arm. And we can also just look at the fact that her posterior is darker than this color to know that the light is probably coming from this direction. Also her hair, because again, the hair is a volume, okay? But you might look at something and say, but this has a light. It does have a light. What kind of light is it, everybody? It's a fill light. The point is, you understand that even though there are two light sources, this lantern is not the main one, but it does cast a light on the boobies and a little bit on the arm. It's okay to have multiple light sources, and you can help differentiate them with color, and I think it's fair to say that the results speak for themselves. This is one good example of how to do that, and there's actually a third light source here as well. We didn't talk about it as much, but you can see that in one instance, there is one light coming from behind, presumably the sunlight. That is the kick. See it now? You can tell that this light has a different color from the others and is coming from a different direction. That's what identifies it as a third light source. That all make sense? Can you take a guess what the lesson of this drawing is? Before you do, where's the light coming from? 2? Yeah, I would say it's about 2, because we can see that the Futaba's little chest is getting some light here, but we're getting shadow here from the head. We can also see it very clearly on the leg. So that all of that tells us the light is coming from 2. And furthermore, if we make a clock like this, where are we here? Where are we on the horizontal, would you say? Yeah, 1. It's coming from behind her. Because if we're coming from the side, we would get more light here. Yeah. So now we've identified the light direction, and you'll notice that it is very subtle. There's almost no, like, cast shadow in here. There's a lot of reflected light, you might say, that gives her skin a really soft tone. But this drawing still has lines. Where are they? They're where the skin curves over the edge. Soejima puts a line in there because that fits within his system of representing volume. Make sense? He puts them in here, right on the shirt, but he doesn't put any lines on the knee for the most part, or even on the fingers in many ways. Like, he doesn't put a line here, for example. He prefers to put them only on the fingers themselves because this makes her fingers feel smoother. There's not really much to say about this except that it's a great example as far as metallics. Look at how daftly he represents that horizon I was talking about. The darkest part, the second darkest part, and this is bright, super bright. And this up here is less bright. That's the basis of the system. It looks like he's represented some person there, yes. It's not too important to make it very specific, but if you have some idea to not make this just a flat, like, straight line, that can give the impression that it's actually reflecting something. Okay? Okay, here's one last one. So where is the light coming from? You could just draw a mirror if you want to get really fancy. Well, I mean, you could just draw another thing. Yes, you could reflect it, but I don't think it's helpful to give that note just because you're basically just asking someone to make another composition, and the reflection will lose some things because whatever light is reflected is coming from a long ways away. It's going to lose contrast. In some sense, I think drawing everything exactly in the chrome would actually be a detriment, because it doesn't account for how the light is being refracted. So I wouldn't just say to draw everything. So, where's the light coming from? Give me a letter, give me a number. Well, that's fair, but I think it's also a unusual example, because that picture is literally all about the reflection. In that sense, it's not really, it's like, yeah, you can draw a mirror, and if you're drawing specifically a mirror, then you're going to be drawing the mirror. But we're talking about the generalizable case in which we're drawing a metallic object. So I think it's an example of basically, you know, breaking the rules because Esther is so interested in how light behaves. But I think generalizing that example would have you spend more time than you need. 11-1, 11I, so that would be like here. 11I, 4D, 10I. Okay. I think there's a pattern here, and I hate to break it to Defiant Badgers, but the majority of the class is right. Now you might say to yourself, but I see this light here on the other side. Well, what kind of light is this, class? There is a light here. But is it the light direction? What are we seeing on this side? No, you've got it right, Fablewood. That's the reflected light. Believe in yourself. We can tell that the light is from the left because we get these huge highlights on the knees and on the arrow and on his chest. And we know it's from behind because you still get this shadow on the head. We get this kind of light here because the assertion is that even though you have this core shadow, you can see it very nicely illustrated here, and even this little cast shadow right here between the knees. This other side is going to be brighter. That helps give these legs a sense of roundness and depth. Same with the shirt. Look at this lovely core shadow here. It's not over here. It's here in the middle. The drawing is somewhat impressionistic, but it has a really good understanding of how to use core shadow to create the sense of depth. Basically, you said the same thing. You assume the ray originates from the center of the... Oh, I see what you're saying. So you were assuming this, right? So, let's see. Can you guys find any specular highlights? Can you see any objects on Link that should be shining a little bit more than, say, his clothes? The metal of the bow, very good. Right here. These shines are specular and depict somewhat that the bow is metallic. The book is just glowy. No, it's not just glowy. Your answer is correct. On this left side, you can see a little bit of specular highlight. Don't sell yourself short, silly. You're very smart. This here is a specular highlight. This stuff is glowy, it's true, but these highlights are specular. Now, when we say that the book is glowy, you could assert that this is itself a small fill light. I think that if the artist had wanted to draw more attention to the, I forget what it's called, the Sheikah slate, they would have been justified in putting a little bit of orange here if they wanted to. But the important thing is Link. The important point of contrast is here, so he didn't want to do that. I think it's a smart decision overall. And what's the last thing on our list of things you need to shade? Where's the focus? In this case, I would even assert there can be a couple answers that make sense. The arrow. You're focused here. And it is true that this light, very bright. I think that if they had not put in these brush strokes and done something like this, you would absolutely be mostly focused on the arrow. What's interesting is that because they put in those brush strokes, I think that it's actually not the highest point of contrast. I would argue that it's actually here by the face, because you get the bright white of the arrow against the dark of the face, against the black of Link's pupils and eyes, and of course you also get the color contrast with the orange and the blue, but that's beyond the tale of today's discussion. Still, I think, like I said before, that there are a bunch of correct answers, and of course the arrow also helps. It also helps that it's got this perspective thing going for it. It's clear that you're thinking in terms of contrast, and that is good. The arrow uses the strands of body to draw it into Link's face. Also true. These two are interconnected, very clearly. Oh, goodness, I almost forgot. Backgrounds. I know you guys don't really care about backgrounds, but I think that we should just briefly go through in principle. Okay, since you're all very cute, we'll do this one more time. For the backgrounds. Okay. Where's the light coming from, everyone? Let's hear some guesses. Sky at G11, maybe 10. So everyone's agreed on G, 11 or 10, and also 8 I've heard. So everyone is saying left and towards us. I-10. Okay. You're coming at it from the other direction. This time, I would argue that Dan is actually more correct. Why? Because we can see that there is not only a shadow on the right side. You can see, for example, how... let's see. We can all see that this part is shaded, right? So we know that it's on the left. But look at these buildings. We can see that these buildings are shaded in. That means that the sun's got to be coming from this direction, towards us, or we wouldn't see these parts shaded as much. If anything, you could argue that it's probably directly from the left, because if you look at these shadows here, they're pretty much horizontal. Though I doesn't quite make sense seeing the light in front of the guy. What do you mean the light in front of the guy? What we're seeing here is the light filtering in through the trees. I wouldn't really call it from the front of him. Like, all of this is representing that there's a tree line, and that if it were from behind him, I think you would still see, well, I suppose you could argue that his leg kind of implies that it must be from the front. More or less, I think it's anticipated from the left side. Good job, class. I hope you're enjoying these exercises. As a teacher, ever hoped that a class would enjoy, you know, the tests. Now then, we've found the light direction. The volumes. We're focusing on the background mostly now. And I guess I'm mostly asking you to do this in your heads. I think he's lit differently than everything else in the scene. Oof. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Where's the point of focus here? Teachers don't care if you enjoy the classes or not. Well, I'm not a teacher, so I care. You know? You all, this isn't a class. You're not paying for it. I need to keep you here. Through interest. Felt that on a whole other level. Ooh. You can use multiple letters as your answer. The light that bespeckles him adds contrast against the shadows he's in. Correct. I think that gives us a lot of clues as to why we've had his foot in the light there, to be honest. Where is the focus in this piece? J. Why do you think J? On the line between E and F. Okay, okay. This is actually kind of fun. I'm liking this. We've got J. We've got this line. No, you don't need to second guess yourself necessarily. So far, I think that everyone is getting to the right idea here. What's happened is that they've used the contrast between this dark side and this light side, as well as this compositional method of the street. And we're focused here, basically. Exactly, Jill. Fable. AE. It's not important where is brightest, it's about where the contrast is. I hope if you take away something from the class that maybe it will be that. A and E? Oh, like here? Well, the idea is that the contrast between this and this, value-wise, is not very high, compared to the contrast between this and this. J's part of the focus, the rent leads a ride down from the guy to the girl. Right, and we're getting a little into compositional stuff here, so we won't spend too long on that. Now, volumetrically, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I can't really have you, you know, interact, so to speak. But I think it's not that hard to see, for example, that these buildings... What is this building? It's basically a cube with one side cut out. Same with this building. Same with this building. It's got a pyramid on top. All of this left side is just the right side of a cube. Reduce it all down to simple shapes. You could go one more and just kind of view this entire block as one long rectangle. You guys are all doing great. Seriously. There's 2 more questions on the quiz. Question is, do you know where this background's from? Just kidding. Extra credit. Who knows where this background's from? Kiki, you got it! Hooray! You got it! You're on fire, Fabled Wind. Very nice. Okay, everyone. Where's the light direction from? Really? It's pretty good. I think when it first came out, and particularly the original dubs, kind of sell it as being more childish, but it's a good film. And that was from Spirited Away? What do you mean that was from Spirited Away? Oh, yes. Good. I'm glad that worked. Like, seriously though. Start with is it the left or is it the right? You know? 1BC, okay. Any other guesses? I don't necessarily need to call them guesses. You guys are pretty smart. (1A). Cool. Alright, we're getting a lot of stuff in the exact same neighborhood here. I'm really glad that you guys are thinking through this, actually. I think that you are correct. The giveaway is these plants. You can really clearly see here where that highlight is. Also here, see how this light is being cast. It's being cast downwards. Very nice job. And God, can we just pause a second and look at how beautiful these potted plants are using our favorite core lighting system? Look at this. Here's our highlight. Here's our core shadow. And look how this green light works as a reflected light and as a fill. See how they're different colors? Now, you might say, why is it green? There's no green lights. It's green because green plants are reflecting green lights. Do you get it? That's why we call it reflected light. You can also see a little bit of it under this potted plant over here. Where is the focus of this composition? G to K. G to K. Okay. Other thoughts? Why do you think that the focus is G to K? Fabled Wind says F. Why do you think the focus is F? I feel that Fable is more correct in this point, just because, to me, the greatest point of contrast is between this shadow and this light, particularly on this post. You see how this side is so dark and this side is so light. This is helped, of course, by the perspective, which we're trying not to talk about today, but you thought A to M? A to M? What do you mean? Let's take it down. Take down the saturation again. Where's the biggest point of contrast here? To me, all of this stuff on the left is black, and this stuff here is practically white. So you're going to see a lot of contrast here, and what do you know? I'm pretty sure that's where the character is when we look at this in the film. The bright glass besides the dark leaves to the right of it, plus the vines in the back. Oh, that was your logic for here? The thing about the bright grass to me is that it doesn't actually contrast, because the stuff behind it is also bright. Remember not to think in terms of bright or dark is where we look. We're looking for contrast. You could argue about whether this contrasts with this, but I think it's not as strong as here to here. That's the sharpest contrast that I see, so I think that this is the focus. But hey, you can argue these things. Lovely background, I'm sure we can all agree. And what's this? What are these? Specular highlights? See how with just one glance, we notice how these objects must be metallic? And it's not just the specular highlights. Look at the refractive lighting systems going on here. We have this pooled light over here on the left. Just all of these things instantly read as metallic in a room full of plants. You get me? Okay, this is the end of class, alright? This is a background from one of my favorite films, Osamu Tezuka's Metropolis. Now, the light direction here is very complicated. Mostly because you're probably going to realize that there are, in fact, multiple light sources. But let's pretend we had to draw this background. Where would you say the, where would you say the key light is? Because we understand, right, that there are going to be at least 2 light sources here. Where is the key light? Where is it pointed? J, O? Ah, I see. Like, from this door going out this way. Other thoughts? J-O-L? I said J and you moved the grid. Oh, okay, sorry. Grid is here. J to O, right. I really like the way you guys are thinking. Because when you think of it like a composition, right? This spot here is really important. And from that logic, we could say that even though we don't even see the light, you could argue that the key should be here. But note how so much of the shadows here, they aren't black, they're blue. That blue is a reflected light. Now, why is it that this isn't the key light, you might ask? I mean, what is it showing here? I would argue that this is balancing out this light, and this also helps us see this kind of triangular shape here. It drives us to this area. I guess I just want you guys to remember that there are situations where you can't rely on the sun to determine where the key light is and what the light direction is. I'd say the strongest light in this piece is definitely either this one, arguably maybe this light too. Plus the light has other lights around it, so it's less contrasty. Very good. Now, one might ask, where should the focus be here? Praise the sun. So let's ask. Where do you think the focus should be here? I'm going to move the grid again. There. Can't decide if it's E or L. Both of which are very much towards the edge, isn't it? K. I like that. Possibly O. Right. To me, I think that the focus is definitely meant to be around here. I think that from a compositional perspective, which we're still trying not to talk about, these lines are moving us down here. All of this space contrasts so much with everything around it that we're clearly meant to look in this area. And I also have the additional knowledge that in the film, what is going to happen is you're going to see a bunch of silhouetted figures come in front of this area. And the fact that we've been looking here suddenly creates this contrast where we're suddenly looking at, oh, what the hell just happened? What came in front of that light? You got me? It's just a really unique approach to the background. And I hope that it gives you guys some thoughts and ideas. Now you'll realize that once an object comes in front of this, all of these key lights can also become kicks. See what I'm saying? Like so. So some things to take with you. Impressively and completely according to plan, we have gone for our normal 4-hour time with our very not normal, you know. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Don't really know, didn't really know how this was going to go, but you were all very engaged. I hope you got something out of it. Bye-bye. If you have any questions, please interject. I'd love to do my best to make this into not just a throw it on YouTube tutorial. I feel that YouTube tutorials tend not to work because whoever's making them can't interface with their audience and understand where everybody is in the process, what's useful for them to learn, and what they're not learning. Do be afraid to ask questions. You will be ridiculed before the class. I think that was a typo, but I'll wait for Monique to confirm.